Hi, Bill Kristol here with Bulwark on Sunday. Sorry for the slight delay. Very
It's my
technical
fault.
challenges. Technical challenges which we overcame though, because that's how the Bulwark is, and that's how Michael Wood is. I'm glad to have Michael with us with me again. A businessman in Texas, failed congressional candidate in one race, but
Oh,
that was hard. Okay, it was not failed. It was a noble effort and made an important point that there's no room for for anyone who's critical of Trump in the
it was
Republican
a
Party anymore.
moral victory. It was a 2% moral victory, I think.
That was a few years ago anyway, and I guess most important for and a Marine veteran, a combat veteran, and now, and most importantly for this conversation, the author of a really excellent Substack, the most recent of which was really striking, "The End of Pax Americana." It's a from the future in 2039 little essay and really thought provoking. So I thought we'd talk about that and then talk a little bit about maybe what's going on in the Defense Department as well, which you're plugged into and obviously know a lot about. So Michael, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again. It's good to talk. How are things in Virginia?
Oh, great. Good, actually. I have to vote tomorrow and early, a week out. I think we'll have a good election result from my point of view here. So Virginia is one of the actually the better states of the union right now, maybe. And Youngkin, for all that I'm not in love with him, has kind of protected us weirdly from some of the Trump stuff because he's a Republican governor. So they haven't bothered too much. It hasn't been too much ICE action here or that kind of thing. So and
So
we're
all
about to.
around, there's not sort of freaking out that you're seeing in New Jersey or anything like that?
No, I think she's ahead by 10, 12 points, and I've seen no reason,
Okay.
nothing about the race changing really. So, famous last words, but I think that'll be the case. So, let's talk about your excellent piece on gloomy dystopian piece almost on what the world will look like in 2039. It's both the end of Pax Americana and I think also the decline and fall of the American Republic. But talk a little bit about the piece, about what you're suggesting there, and why you chose to write it now.
So it sort of came out of the headlines that we all saw earlier this week when the national debt, I think, went up to $38 trillion. And more than that, it seems like we're adding to the debt at a faster clip than we ever have before, and also faster than anyone expected. And I do think it's the case that right now and for a long time, Americans haven't really cared about the gap between our revenues and our expenditures and what that's doing to the debt. But eventually we're going to care. And so I was trying to sort of think through, you could just write a piece saying, hey guys, these are the dangers, but it didn't really seem like that would hook people the way I wanted to hook them. So I decided to write it sort of as a retrospective, something in the New York Times or maybe in The Economist from the future, 2039, sort of looking back over what the consequences of this might be, not just economically, but also in terms of our foreign policy, the rest of the world, and also our domestic politics. Because this can't go on forever, and eventually something that can't go on forever is going to stop. And it's sort of just laid out some scenarios for that. It was sort of the worst case scenario, but then talking to some people, and then Claire Belinsky, your former colleague at the Weekly Standard, also wrote that she doesn't think it's a tail end scenario. She thinks it's sort of realistic and sort of right there in the middle of the bell curve. So, yeah, that was a background to it.
Yeah, and you have both the end of Pax Americana, which you should say a word about abroad, and also the rise. I guess you have a budget deal in 2037, which, tough vote, austerity, and so forth, which then leads to a sort of Trump on steroids type movement in 2039. So
Yeah.
say a word about both of those, and how much of this is sort of Trump inspired, how much of it is debt inspired. I guess the two overlap, right?
Well, they do overlap, and I was, for some reason, earlier this week, maybe it was the Rest is History podcast or something, but I was reading about or listening to something about the United Kingdom in the 1970s, whenever they were very much the sick man of Europe. And I think, yeah, they had to ask for an IMF bailout, I believe. And then I don't think he'll mind me using his name here, but I was texting with Kevin Williamson, formerly at National Review, now at the Dispatch. I was like, what is going to happen if the United States has to ask for an IMF bailout? And he pointed out correctly that it just wouldn't happen. There's not enough money in the world. We're not like the United Kingdom in the 1970s. So that's what got me thinking. And so if there's nobody, the cavalry's not sort of coming to save us, in this sort of scenario where the bond market sort of revolt, they would want our political system to finally show that there was a plan to bring revenues and expenditures into line. And that's going to be painful if it gets to that point. It's sort of like on a much bigger scale, the bond market's revolting against Liz Truss a few years ago when she came out with her sort of insane tax plan. And the bond market said, no, this is going to explode the deficit. You can't do this. And that led to the end of Liz Truss. So in this scenario, it's going to be something painful. And it's going to be a combination of tax rises and spending cuts, which leads to the Pax Americana part of this, because it's a lot easier to cut the military than it is to cut entitlement spending or healthcare spending. And they're going to do that. I mean, obviously, nothing's going to be easy. Military bases will be upset. Military families will be upset. But in this sort of scenario, they're going to cut the Pentagon. And once you cut the Pentagon, you cut bases and our credibility in places like Europe and Eastern Asia. And then it's a short jump from that to maybe some bad things happening on the Korean Peninsula, maybe NATO really falling apart, maybe Russia, making moves on the Baltics, and then we're off to the races. In terms of the domestic political, the dangerous thing about Trump, there are a lot of dangerous things about Trump, but I'm very much worried about precedents. This guy's a clown. He's a clown with a flamethrower, but he's very much a clown. It's very much correct that he's probably not disciplined enough to be, I don't know, a sort of a Hitler figure or something like that. He's not smart enough either. But what about the next guy? What about the guy who maybe was a general, the guy who is very smart, the guy who's very disciplined, the guy who maybe has parts of the military behind him? He's going to be able to point back to what's happening right now and say, Trump set tax policy, essentially tariff policy, unilaterally. It sounds like he's going to say that he has the ability to set spending policy unilaterally, that he can, I guess, deport people without habeas corpus, all these things. And that's why, we need to worry about it today, even if the man himself has soup for brains, which he does.
Yeah, no, that's so. I was struck by that in the piece. A lot of what you have happening in 2039, I think, could happen in 2029. I mean, or even before. And the Trump being a clown with a flamethrower, that's complicated. As Miller and Vaught maybe aren't clowns, and I don't know. It's an interesting question how much the kind of con man demagogue side of Trump takes the edge off in a way, the authoritarian side. It also enables it. It is an interesting. Historians will unfortunately find this an interesting case study, and I've always thought the chances of just collapse were slightly higher than the chances of genuine, sustained, successful autocratic takeover. But which I think is kind of what where you're maybe coming down. The two can go together, right? I mean, it's sort of Hugo Chavez, or I think maybe you mentioned Argentina in the piece. I can't remember, but Perón, or other people have anyway. Peronism outlasts Perón, and it can be both very nasty and very shambolic, right? And so I think but I think you were smart in a funny way. The piece is more effective because it separates us from Trump a little. We've all made the Trump argument many times. Doesn't mean it shouldn't keep on being made, but you make it in the context of the debt and these other forces, which I think lets people take a fresh look at it. Yeah,
and it's all very scary, because it's not just that we can't sort of get our spending or our taxing under control, but it's also just, I mean, the entire political system seems to be sort of just collapsing around us. And I don't know. I'm in a very dark place. I don't know if you are. I know you're kind of optimistic about Virginia in the near term future, but I'm pretty pessimistic about how this is all going to work out. It seems like our politics and maybe our economy eventually are just going to collapse. So you didn't think it was too over the top? You thought that maybe it was actually
right? You were
pushing it out that far.
I think it was good of you to push it out that far, because it lets people maybe not say, "Oh my God, this is litigated." I mean, I don't like when people. I don't like bowing at all to the charge that some of us are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. I think that's a fake charge. And in fact, those of us who were most upset about Trump, frankly, have been, I think, pretty well vindicated just in just
Trump
one.
grandchild syndrome is the only way to approach this moment.
Yeah. And
American.
I don't want to give anything to them in a sense. Having said that, I just think as a rhetorical matter, putting it in a slightly different frame is helpful. And it is a legitimate different frame. It's not like you're just playing a rhetorical trick here, and none of us knows what's going to happen in 2029 or 2039. So it's perfectly fine to put it off a little bit more. And I think maybe, frankly, for your generation too, this is you thinking about the world when you're going to be, I don't know, 55 or something like that. And that's very important, obviously. And for people, for me, it's probably I'm a little more short-term focused. So no, but I thought it was very thought-provoking. I mean, the degree, and I do think people just, don't you agree that it feels like people have just not internalized the situation we're in? I mean, that I put both into the global order. What would the global order would look like if it becomes a disorder, a real disorder, and also what internally things could look like if we hit a wall in terms of spending and taxing, but also in terms of all the civil liberties protections and so forth. I feel like this. Go ahead.
I think that's right. I've been spending a lot of time, and I might try to write about this, is that, most people have never really paid attention to politics. Most people are just getting on with their lives. And that's been the case for a long time. And it's the case right now. What I'm concerned about is it seems like elites, however you define that, don't really understand what time it is, to use the trendy right-wing phrase right now. Some of them do, but I feel like a lot of do you think the Democratic Party, not just Joe Biden himself, but do you think the Democratic Party really understood in late 2023, early 2024, how high the stakes were? Because it seemed like a lot of them really weren't acting like it. You were very brave, if that's the word to use, and A.B. Stoddard and a few others saying it can't be Biden. It's going to be a disaster if it's Biden. But everybody just sort of, beyond the president himself, everybody just sort of acted like this was just another election. And I'm not really sure. It kind of seems like a lot of the Democratic Party, the opposition, the godforsaken Democratic Party that's supposed to help us get out of this moment, is sort of approaching the midterms in a very similar way, as if democracy, as if we're still a functioning republic. And I don't think we are. I mean, there's a little bit of it, but is there creative thinking about how to win Senate seats and,
or just more broadly about the moment? I'd say two things. I think it is a key question, and one that I've also been thinking about a lot lately. And I mean, I guess three things I'll say. A, Democratic elected officials are going to be catching up with this parade, not leading it. And I think it's just the nature of things. I'm not really here being terribly critical. It's like anyone else. You've been in a system, you've done well in the system, you've made it to Senate or governor or member of the House or big shot in the state you live in. You've probably been in the system 10, 20, 30 years. It's just hard to say things aren't a version of what they've been for my career. And I mean, we all have this problem. And so I think we just have to, No Kings, for me, that No Kings is the moment where it really clicked in. I mean, it clicked in a little bit before, but where the leadership's going to have to come from outside and from around. And then a lot of these Democratic politicians could have just fine. They know intellectually that we shouldn't be blowing up, boats in the Caribbean, that we have no evidence or a legal argument for why we should be doing that. We can't just be using ICE the way we've been doing it, and so forth and so on. And tariffs, lawlessness of tariffs, but they're not. I think they'll come around, but I think the leadership, the urgency probably has to come from outside. Second point, this is all just building off things you said. I think I've been in so many meetings. I think maybe Tim and I talked about this week, where, or Sarah and I, just a week ago on this show, where, well-intentioned and intelligent people, elites, let's call them though, were sort of, how do we get the public to understand this? How the public they're so busy with their lives, and this is sort of patronizing, but, kind of well-meaning, I'd say, patronization of the public. And I mean, I always feel like saying, the public, for all of its problems, and there are problems, obviously, we elected Trump twice, still, his approval rating on the public's down around 41, 42%. They're drifting away from Trump. There's nothing for them to do mostly right now, and I'm not in despair about them. It's the elites who have really conspicuously and importantly capitulated, and have gone beyond capitulation to collaboration now. The public is being the public. They're not going to be. It's sort of like the Democratic politicians. very hard for them to really be in the lead if the elites aren't signaling, hey, you need to really get out there, right? And so no kings is striking for me in that respect. No kings did not happen because a bunch of Democratic politicians or famous community leaders or big business types or university presidents even said we all need to go out there and demonstrate. I mean, it was sort of organic and ground up. So I think in that respect, it's both a good sign but a worrisome sign, because at the end of the day, you do need some elites to stop Trump. The guardrails, very hard for the public to construct these guardrails from the bottom up. Honestly, they exist. They have to be manned by guardians. Those guardians are inevitably going to be sort of the elites, if you want to call it that, and that I think I'm very much alarmed by the failure of the elites in this current moment. And
So, do you think? So, I wrote in one of my Substack pieces that I've been an easy date for a long time now. Like, basically, if Trump's the nominee, then I'm going to vote for the Democrat. I've very much bought into this democracy argument, this no kings argument, before it was even called the no kings argument. And I've been out to a number of marches, which is crazy for me. I'm not a march kind of guy, but I've been out
right.
there. Do you think just political gravity and sort of just the natural rhythm of American life, plus the anti-tyranny message, is going to be enough? Or do you think Democrats need to speak more broadly about what they stand for? Because a lot of my thought right now is sort of about the Democratic Party or the anti-MAGA coalition, what kind of an agenda they need beyond just, pro-democracy type stuff we need. I mean, do you think that's going to be enough to get us out of this moment? If it is, that's great.
No, I think probably not. I'd say there are two things that are needed, though. One is what you said, there should be a positive agenda. I think it's not so important for 2026 in a practical way, because it's going to be a referendum on Trump, but very important for 2028 and very important for other races and just for the part, obviously for the party as a whole. I think in a weird way, though, that's a little easier to focus on, as people are used to the kind of DLC Bill Clinton moment in the 80s and 90s. We have to come up with a new agenda. The centrists want the party to repudiate the left. The left wants the party to repudiate the billionaire Democrats. The combination, the neoliberal stuff. Probably both sides are right to some degree. I mean, one thing I've been trying to argue a little, and I really need to develop this more, is the whole left center thing I'm getting tired of, and the idea that you triangulate a bit to the center, or the left's idea that you just need to kind of double down on every left-wing thing. Both are a little silly, honestly. Almost by definition, we're in such a new situation that there are going to be elements of the center that are right, and elements of the left that are right, and elements that are of the old right that are right. Look at the tariffs, the trade stuff, and all.
Yeah.
So old right, but at least conservatism. So so I'm very much I'm for the positive agenda, and I think it's important and worthwhile. But I'd say what more striking is what we were touching on before, just to finish the point, which is the lack of alarm among elites and among Democratic office holders, or they're not, what's the phrase that the right uses? They don't know what time it is. So I was in touch with someone, you may know him, but I won't say it was private, so I won't say it was another young veteran, but a little younger than you, I think. Also interested in elective politics, and he had met with a very senior. I just won't say anymore. He's in the electoral mix on the Democratic side, and he met with a very senior Democrat a week ago or something. He was telling me about it, and he said he was shocked at how much this senior Democrat was still operating by business as usual, politics as usual rules. But leave aside the rules, because I'm not against breaking the rules exactly, but just the mindset. I mean, he's like there. He's 37 years old, something. He's thinking this whole country could be, just what you say in the piece, could be falling apart. And he's being told, well, I think we have to just adjust a little this way. And I think we make this argument here. And then if we can handle the redistricting there, it'll be okay. And he actually I don't know as well as I know you, so I'm not sort of constant touch with him, but he texted me kind of just in a state. He had seen something in the newsletter that was kind of jibed with this thought of his. So I think the Democrats both aren't alarmed enough and don't have enough, and aren't positive enough, I guess you could say. And I think the alarm, though, is the first necessity. I mean, once you get really alarmed, you're forced to start thinking about things in a certain way, right? And I do think it's amazing after everything we've been through in these 9 months, but I've been in so many discussions in the last week or two where there's a kind of sense that, well, that was kind of crazy. But now, maybe the courts will save us a little on the tariffs, and some of the stuff. There's how much work can they do in some of these areas, and DC. You walk around. I was in DC last night. There's a couple of National Guardsmen at some particular intersection standing there, look like perfectly nice, very young men, and doing nothing much. And so that's not so terrible. I think there's a lot of that. The San Francisco mayor talked Trump out of going to San Francisco, and so I think there is. I guess I come back to the lack of alarm. And final point I'll make, since I've gone on too long, is, I mean, we're only 9 months in, right? And
Yeah, and it's funny. What you were just saying that this other Democrat was saying. I mean, we are just used to the military being deployed to American cities now.
Yeah,
like that playbook that Trump or Miller or whatnot, like that has worked. It probably, I don't think it would even make the front page if like active duty military were sent to, I don't know, pick your major American cities. I mean, that is a big deal. And to your point, we're only 9 months into this. So yeah, I mean, who knows?
9 months in, and it's kind of accelerating. I mean, one thing if you're 9 months in and he's got a lot of setbacks and roadblocks, he's got a few, and that therefore they're pulling back. And I think the Elon thing gave people that impression, right? I mean, he was huge for 3, 4, 5 months, and then he goes away, and some of the Doge stuff dies down, I guess you could say. Obviously, they're still doing a ton of stuff in that area. But I think more broadly, it's, as I say, it's at least in some areas accelerating. In some areas, it's just continuing. Maybe in a few areas, it's slowing down a bit. But anyway, it'd be reckless to assume that we've seen the worst of it after 9 months. Why would that be?
Yeah, and actually, I mean, on this, we can talk about foreign policy or the military or whatnot, but I mean, I've fully embraced my Trump derangement syndrome, and I encourage everybody else to fully embrace it as well. And what I'm really worried about is I'm worried about active duty military being deployed to blue areas to sort of screw around with the midterms. I'm worried about, very aggressive redistricting the way we've seen in Texas. And I hate to even put this out into the universe, but I'm worried about political assassinations with a sort of either an explicit promise of a presidential pardon or sort of an implicit promise of a presidential pardon. I mean, I know it sounds insane, but again, only 9 months into this, and the guy thinks he's a king, even if he's not smart enough to articulate it that way in his brain. I think he thinks he's a king, and this is sort of the natural progression to this. And I mean, it's crazy to think about how successful he's been versus where he was at the beginning of 2021, at the end of 2020. Napoleon invades Russia. Hitler invades the Soviet Union. Whenever you have success after success after success, it takes a superhuman amount of wisdom to sort of hold back and say, I can't do that next big thing. And I don't think he has that. So anyway, Trump derangement syndrome, everybody should adopt it.
No, and I think you're right. And again, if he really got, tariffs, he gets a little pushback, and then he does adjust a bit. Still, damage is done, I think, especially over the medium and long term. But yeah, he's shrewd, and sometimes shrewd about pulling back a bit. Let it look as if he's making case by case studies on judgments on the military. So San Francisco, they talked him out of it, and then the next time he deploys the military, he can say, "I'm not automatically deploying it everywhere. I'm only deploying it where it's necessary." Now, is he thinking this through in a very systematic way?
He's got a reptilian mind.
But he has a reptilian mind, right?
Comes out of just decades and decades of living in New York City with that, hothouse media environment. And he couldn't articulate, I don't think, but he just knows how to push and when to slightly pull back.
Yeah. I mean, con men are
maybe the greatest demagogue in American history.
Right. And the con man side of it is not trivial. I mean, con men aren't stupid. Bernie Madoff isn't a stupid guy. And he actually was careful. I don't know that much about the Madoff thing, but my impression is that he was careful not to produce too great profits for his investors that looked crazy. You know what I mean? People would say, well, you can't be making 50% a year. No one does 60% a year. No one does that. So he made like 14%. I'm making this up. It was something like that, pretty steadily. And people thought, well, he's a smart guy and he's got a good system, and that's not out of line. I mean, people do make 14% in some years, at least on the stock market and so forth. So yeah, no, I think he has that kind of reptilian mind, which is the combination of the con man, the demagogue, the showman, that's the salesman. It's a pretty unusual, and then the authoritarian movement that's built up under him. And of course, that's a huge difference between the first term and the second term, and his own sense that he wants that and needs that. He wants the Hegseths and the Millers and the Bondis, not the Jeff Sessions and the Jim Mattises and the John Kelly's and so forth. That's very, very important, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is, if people don't realize it yet, they should. There is a whole sort of intellectual Claremont Institute type movement behind this insane man that's trying to put sort of an intellectual scaffolding around all this. And they really do want a Red Caesar to crush right now their cultural enemies, but eventually anybody who dissents politically.
Well, and they conflate those two. I mean, Miller does that explicitly. The Democrats are the party of the terrorists. So, I mean, they're kind of conflating what they hate culturally with what their opponents politically, and those who literally they claim threaten the security and the life of people in this country. I mean, that's why I worry about the stochastic violence, they call it. I mean, I don't know, assassinations. I mean, God forbid, I hope not, but also just violence. I mean, there could be real mob action with people let's just say January 6th, with people believing that, resulting incidentally in some deaths, but a lot of injuries and a lot of just chaos, and people believing that they're going to be pardoned, and with some implicit encouragement by parts of the federal law enforcement like ICE, some implicit and help from red state law enforcement. I mean, I think people are underestimating that side of the danger.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the Principles First conference earlier this year, as you were as well, in Washington, D.C. And we were there, I think, the week the Proud Boys were pardoned.
Or just
Enrique
right.
Terrio, the head of the Proud Boys, showed up.
Right.
And he made trouble, and he was walking around as if he was above the law, which he sort of is. He and his ilk are as well. I mean, this is bad.
And they had a little face off with our security, and they went away. But again, a year, 2 years from now, do they go away when there's a conference, an anti-Trump conference in D.C.? Do they actually try to really intimidate people? Do they try to really beat up some people? I mean, right. I think it's very, what about, you mentioned the defense, we both mentioned the Defense Department, the military, you know it well, better than I mean, I guess I have assumed, and I guess I still believe, that the military is one of the sturdier guardrails. On the other hand, no guardrail is permanent or without some possibility of being breached, so talk about where you think the military is. I mean, the ICE, and ICE, I think, is really an amazingly bad development. And we would not have predicted that it was possible, I would say, to have ICE doing what it's doing, to have the kind of recruiting to ICE that we now have, if you look at the videos and the ads. And I mean, anyways, talk about that and about the military.
It's, as a former Republican, it's hard to say, but it really is true that, as far as I can tell, there are only two institutions in American life that have not bent the knee to Donald Trump over the past decade. And the first is the Democratic Party. I mean, we've already talked about the problems with them, but I mean, they've opposed him. You got to give them credit for that.
Totally.
I'm voting for him these days. And the second one is the military. Thank God.
And some of the lower court judges, I would say, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. But even the Federalist Society seems to be slowly bending the knee, so it's only a matter of time. Anyway, so I'd say the Democratic Party and the military, but there's no guarantee that the military will stay that way. And then that is sort of a nightmare scenario if it sort of goes from being a nonpartisan institution to being sort of some sort of Republican guard. And I wrote in one of my pieces, whenever Hegseth was doing this absolutely dumb generals meeting, that whenever I look at the General Officer Corps, I think the 800 or so general officers and their senior enlisted advisors who are in that room, I think they're probably solid. And it seemed like they were solid, and they weren't rising to the bait to sort of turn that into a partisan political rally. Absolutely disgusting display, but they kept their honor clean. Whenever I look at them, though, I really do think about sort of what the Senate GOP conference looked like a decade ago. And over time, people like Bob Corker, who sort of pushed back a bit, they retired, they got pushed out. Other ones didn't run for re-election, like Jeff Flake, I believe. And then over time, you have a MAGA Senate conference for the GOP. And these guys, I mean, people think that whenever you put on a military uniform, you're sort of like Superman. And it's not the case. They're just regular people who are worried about their careers. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them are pretty bad. Most of them are in the middle. But if there's a real concerted effort to promote people whose first loyalty will be to Donald Trump and not the Constitution. Just give it time, and eventually you will have sort of a MAGA general officer corps with all of the follow-on effects of that. I mean, if you're like a 1-star right now and you want to get a 2-star, or if you're a full bird colonel and you want to become a general, or you want to get some sort of command, and let's say you have no moral stand, or you're sort of amoral about all this. I mean, you know which way the wind's blowing. A few months ago, it was reported that Trump was insisted on having one-on-one conversations, I think, in the Oval Office with a lot of people who were up for maybe 4 stars, I think. And I can almost guarantee you that in all those conversations, the word Constitution was never even uttered. I think he wants his generals, as he said. And yeah, I mean, elections have consequences. And I think we all just have, I mean, we just have to push back against it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and get a little more visibility, and also if some of the Senate Republicans. I think your point about the Senate Republicans is interesting. It's not like they're all MAGA. There are people who are, let's say, pre-MAGA senators, Republican senators, John Thune, but they
Yes.
go along, right? And that would be what a general officer corps would look like. It's not going to be 800 MAGA enthusiasts. It's going to be whatever 100 who've gotten promoted over these 3 years of Hegseth running promotion boards and arranging and some firings and so forth, and then a lot of others going along, I suppose, right?
Right. And I mean, Mike Flynn, crazy Mike Flynn. I mean, he got 3 stars. Like,
Yeah.
there's no guarantee that just because you have something shiny on your collar that you're not secretly insane.
And it doesn't take that many near the top to start, then the others feel they have to go along, and then the Jags are kind of deep, they've been sort of fired or marginalized. Right. I mean, this is where I just wish that one could have more. They've done a pretty good job, I got to say, of shutting down visibility into, my impression is, into DOD, into the military. I feel like we used to hear a lot more about what was going on, and then what you see what's happening with ICE. I don't think the military is going to be like ICE, but could it be 10 or 20 or 30 degrees more like ICE than it is today? Yeah, I think so, right?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the Caribbean. Let's talk about what's going on.
Yeah, let's close with that. I'll let you go in a couple minutes. But yeah.
It seems like we're just killing people in the Caribbean. I mean, I might as well there's no beating around the bush. As far as I can tell, it seems like war crimes are happening right now. It seems like we're just using military force certainly without any sort of congressional approval, but also there's no, like in Afghanistan, we had positive identification combined with either a hostile intent or a hostile act. Right now, there's really not any of that. And I think the military lawyers who are still around are going to have some very difficult questions to answer. And I mean, was it the head of Southcom?
Yeah.
He's the one who resigned, but he didn't resign immediately. He's sort of waiting to do a turnover. Whereas if he's resigning because he's that we're using American force illegally, then why don't you just resign? You've probably got enough of a pension anyway. Who cares about your pension? And go give a press conference. It's all very, and also, like, is the president so checked out that the Secretary of State is going to start a war without him noticing because he's upset about Venezuela? Like,
I know.
Things are bad.
And the generals who were fired haven't spoken out much, and they've been fired. I mean, literally, I guess they were all given a chance to resign, and almost all of them did resign, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others. I feel like, I don't know, I do feel like there's a real failure, an elite failure, honestly, and they have reasons, and some of them are good reasons. Some of them may even be correct reasons, but it can't be correct at all of them. And in there and in other places too, I'd say DOJ, someone's more have spoken up there, but not all of them. And again, they have lives, they have careers. It's not easy to get hired by a law firm if you're it's one thing to be maybe, to leave the Trump Justice Department. But if you haven't caused a huge ruckus, it's another thing to be an outspoken, critic of what's happening there and a whistleblower, so to speak, and then expect to get hired. And again, I don't want to make it careerism. I think a lot of it's social pressure, and a lot of it is people genuinely believing, well, it's not the right thing to do. But I think if you step back, we just need more people to talk about what's at the business. I mean, but having said that, I want to say, incidentally, the military and the lawyers have been like paragons of virtue compared to the business leaders, who are kind of important in America. The business of America is business, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're very much in uncharted territory in a lot of ways here. And I will say that I was very low-ranking officer, but nonetheless, at every level of being in the military, as an officer, it's sort of beat into your head the importance of submitting yourself to civilian authority. Civilians are in charge. That's the American people speaking through their elected representatives. And I wonder if a number of superior officers have sort of overlearned that lesson.
Yeah.
And all these hypotheticals that were put through in OCS and TBS and whatnot, there's never really been a hypothetical about what if you have a criminal president? What if you have a secretary of defense who's asking you to do illegal things? This is uncharted territory. And I don't know. I mean, there's also, General Milley, they threatened him to bring him out of retirement and court-martial him. These people are ruthless, and I wonder how much of that is you put in 30 years, 35 years, and you just don't want to put up with that. But surely, if this keeps going the way it's going, somebody can step up for the good of the country. You can't everyone's going to die eventually. You can't take it with you. So
it's a slightly gloomy note to end on, but an important note. And I really appreciate what you say there about having a criminal president. It's a hard thing to kind of plan for and a hard thing for the system to accommodate. I mean, especially when Congress has collapsed. Congress is so much supposed to be checking the president in so many ways, including with oversight of what's happening with the military. And you do get some statements from some of the Democrats, and maybe they will have more oversight if they win one or both houses. But so far, the degree of Republican capitulation, privately, they're upset, but then are there hearings? Are there anything? I would look at and what's happening with these killings in the Caribbean and now the Pacific. Well, anyway, we could go on. I won't go on. I'll let you get about your Sunday. I'll get about mine. And it's been very thought-provoking, though, and I really, the conversation, I think, and I really appreciate your taking the time. And people should go read your Substack. What are they? Just Google Michael Wood Substack. That's probably the easiest thing, right?
I guess right now it's just titled Michael Wood. I don't really know. I'm not so good with the clever title.
That's good. That's very, a little bit of cult of personality. It's sort of like Trump, it's like the branding, right? That's key,
That's right.
Michael, thanks for joining me today. And thank you all for joining us on Bulwark on Sunday.